The porch light flickered like a dying heartbeat as I twisted the final wire nut into place. 38 years old, and I was still crawling around in the dark fixing other people's electrical problems. Story of my life, really. At least Mrs. Henderson paid in cash. I was packing up my tools when I heard Beth's voice drifting through our kitchen window next door. She was talking to our 15-year-old daughter Mia, and something in her tone made me freeze. "Your father just doesn't understand what a real man looks like," Beth was saying. "Maybe when Uncle Derek gets here tomorrow, you'll see the difference." Uncle Derek, my wife's brother. The golden boy who'd never worked a real day in his life but somehow always had money for fancy cars and expensive clothes. The same Derek who'd been visiting us an awful lot lately while I was out on jobs. I crouched behind the hedge, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the window, I could see Beth pacing around our kitchen in that red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she claimed she'd lost. "Mom, that's mean," Mia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's not mean, honey. It's realistic. Your dad's a good provider, but Derek has ambition, style. He knows how to treat a woman." The screwdriver in my hand bent under the pressure of my grip. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage I'd busted my ass to pay down early, and this was what I got. My wife comparing me to her worthless brother while wearing the dress I'd saved 3 months to buy her. I should have burst through that door right then. Should have demanded answers, thrown Derek's name in her face, made her explain herself. Instead, I sat there in the dark like a coward, listening to my world crumble one word at a time. "Derek's taking me to lunch tomorrow," Beth continued. "That new place downtown, the expensive one. What about Dad? What about him? He'll be at some job site, covered in dust and complaining about his back. Derek appreciates the finer things in life." I'd heard enough, more than enough. I gathered my tools as quietly as possible and slipped around to the back of our house. My hands shook as I fumbled with the key to my workshop. The small building behind our garage had been my sanctuary for years, filled with electrical equipment, spare parts, and the smell of honest work. Now it felt like a prison. I sat on my workbench and stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to call Beth right now, confront her about what I'd heard. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the cold realization that I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went before I made my next move. Derek had always been everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, smooth where I was rough around the edges, charming where I was direct. He'd breezed through college on his parents' money, while I'd learned electrical work in the Navy. He'd married and divorced 3 different women, while I'd stayed faithful to Beth through thick and thin. And now, apparently, he was having lunch dates with my wife, while I paid the bills. I pulled up Beth's phone records on our shared account. We'd combined everything years ago in the name of transparency and trust. What a joke that seemed now. The numbers told a story I didn't want to read. Dozens of calls to Derek's number over the past 3 months, many of them lasting an hour or more. Text messages at all hours, including some sent at 2 in the morning when she claimed she was asleep beside me. My workshop door creaked open, and Beth's silhouette appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to. How was the Henderson job?" I looked at her standing there in that red dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless even at 10 o'clock at night. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, and she was lying to my face with a smile. "Fine," I said, "just fine. You look tired, honey. Why don't you come inside? I'll make you a sandwich." The casual kindness in her voice made my stomach turn. How long had she been playing this game? How many nights had she come to bed fresh from phone calls with Derek, pretending to care about my day while planning her next betrayal? "I'll be in soon," I said. "Just want to organize some things." She hesitated in the doorway, and for a moment I thought she might say something real, something honest. Instead, she just smiled and said, "Don't stay up too late. You have that big commercial job tomorrow." After she left, I sat in the darkness of my workshop and tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do. The smart thing would be to hire a lawyer, document everything, and file for divorce. Clean and simple. But something dark was growing in my chest, something that whispered about justice and revenge and making them both pay for what they'd done to me. I thought about my daughter's voice when she'd called Derek's treatment of women superior to mine. I thought about all the times Derek had borrowed money and never paid it back, all the family gatherings where he'd made subtle jokes about my blue-collar job while wearing clothes that cost more than I made in a week. Most of all, I thought about Beth in that red dress. planning expensive lunch dates with her brother-in-law while I crawled around in the dark fixing other people's problems. By the time I finally went inside, a plan was beginning to form. It wasn't a good plan, and it sure as hell wasn't a legal plan. But it was mine, and it was going to make them both sorry they'd ever decided to make a fool out of me. The house was dark and quiet. Beth was already in bed, her breathing deep and regular. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched her sleep. This woman who'd shared my bed for 2 decades while planning to replace me with her own brother-in-law. Tomorrow, Derek would come for his lunch date. Tomorrow, Beth would get dressed up and go out with him while I was supposed to be safely out of the way at a job site. Tomorrow, they'd probably laugh about how clueless I was, how easy it was to fool the simple electrician. They had no idea what was coming. I called in sick to the commercial job the next morning, something I hadn't done in over 5 years. Beth was in the shower when I made the call, and I could hear her humming some song I didn't recognize. She sounded happy, excited even. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You sure you're okay?" my foreman asked. "You never call in sick." "Just need a day," I said. "Food poisoning or something." It wasn't entirely a lie. The thought of what my wife was planning definitely made me sick to my stomach. Beth emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair still damp. She looked surprised to see me still in bed. "Aren't you running late?" she asked, checking the clock on her nightstand. "Called in sick," I said, watching her face carefully. Feeling pretty rough. For just a second, something flickered across her expression. Disappointment? Panic? Then the concerned wife mask slipped back into place. "Oh no, honey, what's wrong? Can I get you anything?" "Just need to rest," I said. "Probably something I ate." She moved around the bedroom with nervous energy, opening drawers and pulling out clothes. Not her usual stay-at-home outfit of jeans and a t-shirt. She was selecting carefully, a blue dress that hugged her curves, matching heels, jewelry I'd bought her for Christmas. "I might run some errands later," she said without looking at me. "If you're going to be sleeping anyway." "What kind of errands?" "Oh, grocery store, maybe stop by the bank. Boring stuff." And the lies came so easily to her. 20 years of marriage, and I was just now realizing how good she was at deception. It made me wonder what else she'd hidden from me over the years. "Sounds good," I said. "I'll probably sleep most of the day." Relief flooded her face. "Perfect. I mean, that's probably exactly what you need." After she left the bedroom, I got up and positioned myself at the window where I could see the street. Sure enough, at exactly 11:30, Derek's silver BMW pulled up to the curb. He didn't come to the door like a normal person. Instead, he sat in his car and sent a text message. Beth appeared in the hallway below, checking her reflection in the mirror one last time. She looked beautiful, and the sight of her getting dressed up for another man made my chest feel like it was full of broken glass. She slipped out the back door and walked around the house to Derek's car. I watched them embrace through the BMW's windshield, watched her laugh at something he said, watched them drive away to their expensive lunch while I was supposed to be obliviously working. And that's when I made my first real mistake. Instead of following them or gathering evidence like a smart person would do, I let anger take the wheel. I went down to Beth's home office and started going through her things. Her computer was password protected, but I knew her passwords. She used variations of our anniversary date for everything, which felt like another slap in the face under the circumstances. Her email told the whole story. Months of correspondence with Derek, starting innocent enough but quickly turning intimate. They'd been planning this affair like a military operation, coordinating their schedules around my work, discussing how to keep it secret, even joking about how trusting and naive I was. The worst part was reading Derek's messages about me. He called me the electrician, like it was a dirty word. Made jokes about my hands being rough and my clothes smelling like work. Talked about how Beth deserved better than a blue-collar nobody who would never amount to anything. But it was Beth's responses that really destroyed me. She agreed with everything he said, called me boring and predictable, said she'd settled for security instead of passion and regretted it every day. Talked about our sex life in terms that made me want to put my fist through the computer screen. In one particularly brutal exchange, Derek had written, "I can't believe you've wasted 20 years on him." Beth's reply, "Neither can I, but that's going to change soon." I printed everything, every email, every cruel joke, every plan they'd made behind my back. The printer churned out page after page of betrayal, and with each sheet that fell into the tray, something inside me died and something else was born. By the time they returned from lunch, I was back in bed pretending to sleep. I heard Beth come in through the back door, heard her moving around downstairs, probably erasing evidence of where she'd been. She came upstairs and peeked into the bedroom. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. I opened my eyes and looked at her. Her makeup was slightly smudged, her hair a little messed up. She looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly kissed, and the sight made my stomach churn. "Better," I lied. "Much better." "Good. I picked up some soup while I was out. Thought it might help." More lies. She'd been too busy with Derek to think about soup for her sick husband. But she'd probably grabbed a can from the kitchen and heated it up to support her story. "That's thoughtful," I said. "Thank you." She smiled and leaned down to kiss my forehead. Her lips felt like ice against my skin. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Beth slept peacefully beside me. She'd played the concerned wife perfectly all evening, bringing me soup, checking my temperature, even offering to cancel her plans for the next day in case I was still sick. Of course, I knew what those plans were now. Derek was taking her to a hotel 2 towns over, somewhere they thought they'd never be recognized. They'd booked a room for the entire afternoon under Derek's name, and according to their emails, it wasn't their first time there. I had a choice to make. I could confront them, demand a divorce, and try to move on with whatever dignity I had left. Or I could do something else, something that would make them both pay for what they'd done to me and my family. The printed emails were hidden in my workshop, 43 pages of evidence that my marriage was a joke, and my wife thought I was a fool. But evidence could be used for more than just divorce proceedings. It could be used for revenge. As Beth slept beside me, probably dreaming about her afternoon with Derek, I started planning. They thought I was just a simple electrician, too stupid and trusting to see what was happening right under my nose. They thought they were so much smarter than me, so much more sophisticated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, I told Beth I was feeling much better and would be returning to work. She tried to hide her disappointment behind a mask of wifely concern. "You sure? You don't want to push yourself too hard." "I'm fine," I said, kissing her cheek. "Besides, we can't afford for me to miss another day." The comment hit its mark. Beth flinched slightly at the reminder of our financial reality. For all her complaints about my blue-collar job, she certainly enjoyed the steady paycheck it provided. I made a big show of getting ready for work, loading my truck with tools, and complaining about a difficult customer I had to deal with. Beth watched from the kitchen window as I drove away, probably already reaching for her phone to text Derek. But instead of going to work, I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and settled in to wait. I'd installed a security app on our home computer months ago after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood. Beth had forgotten about it, but I could monitor our house remotely from my phone. At exactly 10:15 a.m., Derek's BMW appeared in our driveway. This time he didn't wait in the car. He walked right up to our front door like he owned the place, using the spare key Beth had obviously given him. I watched through the security camera as my wife greeted her brother-in-law in our living room. They didn't waste time with small talk. Within minutes, they were kissing passionately on the couch where I watched football every Sunday. My hands shook as I held the phone, watching my marriage disintegrate in real time. But I forced myself to keep recording. I needed evidence, and I needed them to feel secure in their deception. After about an hour, they moved upstairs to our bedroom. I couldn't watch that part, but I didn't need to. I had everything I needed to destroy them both. I drove to my friend Mike's electrical supply shop and asked to borrow his van for the afternoon. Mike owed me a dozen favors, and he didn't ask questions when I told him my truck was making strange noises. "Keep it as long as you need," he said, tossing me the keys. "Just fill up the tank when you're done." The van was perfect for what I had planned. Unmarked, anonymous, and equipped with a ladder rack that would let me access the power lines behind our house. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the woods that bordered our neighborhood. The power lines ran through an easement behind our house, and I knew exactly which transformer controlled the electricity to our street. It was dangerous work, but I'd been doing electrical jobs for 20 years. I knew how to kill the power to our house without affecting the neighbors, and more importantly, I knew how to make it look like an equipment failure. At exactly 2:30 p.m., I threw the switch. The security cameras went dead immediately, along with every light and appliance in our house. I could picture Beth and Derek fumbling around in the sudden darkness, probably cursing the timing. What they didn't know was that I'd also disabled the backup battery on our garage door opener earlier that morning. They were trapped inside until the power came back on, which wouldn't happen until I decided it should. I gave them 30 minutes to panic before I made my next move. Using Mike's van, I drove to Derek's apartment across town and let myself in with the spare key he kept hidden under a fake rock. Derek had always been predictable in his stupidity. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, imported beer in the fridge, and clothes that cost more than most people's car payments. Everything paid for with money he'd borrowed from family members and never repaid. I didn't take anything. Instead, I left something behind. The printed emails went into Derek's desk drawer, along with a note written in Beth's handwriting. I'd practiced copying her writing style for hours, and the result was convincing enough to fool anyone who wasn't a handwriting expert. The note was simple and devastating. I can't keep lying to him anymore. We have to tell Jake the truth. I signed it with Beth's name and left it on top of the emails where Derek would find it immediately. Then I drove back to the transformer and restored power to our house. By the time I got home from my workday, Beth was in the kitchen making dinner like nothing had happened. She looked frazzled and kept glancing at her phone, but she managed to smile when I walked through the door. "How was your day?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Productive," I said. "Very productive. How about yours?" You know, same old thing, cleaned the house, did some laundry." The lies came so easily to her that I almost admired the skill. She'd probably been practicing deception for years without me realizing it. "Power go out today?" I asked casually. Mrs. Henderson called and said her lights flickered around 2:30. Beth's face went pale. Yes, actually. It was out for about an hour. I was just reading, so it wasn't a big deal." Probably a transformer issue. I should check on that tomorrow." We ate dinner in relative silence, Beth picking at her food while I planned my next move. She kept checking her phone, probably waiting for Derek to call or text. He wouldn't be doing either of those things for a while. Around 9 o'clock, her phone finally rang. I could hear Derek's voice through the speaker, loud and angry. "We need to talk," he said. "Right now." "I can't," Beth whispered, glancing at me. "Jake's home. I don't care where Jake is. Get over here now, or I'm coming there." Beth's hands were shaking as she ended the call. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "I have to run out for a bit," she said. "Sarah's having some kind of crisis." Sarah was Beth's sister, and another convenient lie. But I just nodded and turned back to the television. "Drive safe," I said. "It's supposed to rain." After she left, I poured myself a beer and settled in to wait. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Derek had found the note and the emails, and he was convinced that Beth was planning to confess everything to me. Beth, meanwhile, had no idea what was waiting for her at Derek's apartment. They were about to turn on each other, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your wife is cheating on you with Derek. Thought you should know." I smiled and deleted the message. Anonymous tips were so unreliable, and I was a trusting husband who would never believe such a thing without proof. But if more evidence happened to surface, well, that would be a different story entirely. Beth didn't come home until after midnight, and when she did, she looked like she'd been through a war. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and there were tear tracks down her cheeks. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, but I could feel the tension radiating from her body. She lay there rigid and wakeful until dawn, probably trying to figure out how her perfect affair had suddenly turned into a nightmare. The next morning, she was quiet and distracted. She burned my eggs, spilled coffee on the counter, and jumped every time her phone made a sound. Derek wasn't calling or texting, which was clearly driving her crazy. "Everything okay?" I asked, playing the concerned husband perfectly. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." "You were out pretty late with Sarah. Is she all right?" Beth's face crumpled slightly. "She will be. It's just complicated." I nodded sympathetically and finished my breakfast. Beth was falling apart, and she couldn't even tell me why. The irony was delicious. At work that day, I made a point of telling my crew about the strange power outage in our neighborhood, how it had affected just our street, and how it seemed to have lasted exactly long enough to cause maximum inconvenience. "Weird coincidence," my apprentice Tommy said, "almost like someone did it on purpose." "Who would do something like that?" I asked innocently. "Maybe someone with a grudge," Tommy suggested. "Someone who knew exactly which transformer to hit." I shrugged and changed the subject, but I could see the wheels turning in Tommy's head. He was a smart kid, and he'd remember this conversation later when it mattered. That evening, Beth's phone rang during dinner. She looked at the caller ID and went pale. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the other room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could hear the tone. Derek was angry, Beth was defensive, and neither of them was backing down. After about 10 minutes, Beth came back to the table looking shaken. "Who was that?" I asked. "Wrong number," she lied. That night, I decided it was time to escalate things. While Beth was in the shower, I used her laptop to send Derek an email from her account. "I meant what I said in the note," I typed, copying Beth's writing style perfectly. "I can't live with this guilt anymore. Jake deserves to know the truth, and I'm going to tell him this weekend. I'm sorry, but it's over between us." I sent the message and deleted it from Beth's sent folder, then closed the laptop and went back to watching television. Within an hour, Derek was pounding on our front door. "Where is she?" he demanded when I opened the door. "Where's Beth?" "She's upstairs," I said, genuinely confused by his aggressive tone. "What's going on, Derek? You look upset." Beth appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair still wet from the shower. When she saw Derek, her face went white. "We need to talk," Derek said, pushing past me into the house. "Right now." "Derek, please," Beth said, coming down the stairs. "Not here." "Yes, here," Derek snapped. "I'm done with the games, Beth. I'm done with the lies." I looked back and forth between them, playing the confused husband perfectly. "What's going on? What lies?" Derek turned to me with wild eyes. "You want to know what lies, Jake? Your wife has been—" "Stop," Beth interrupted, her voice sharp with panic. "Derek, don't." "Don't what?" Derek demanded. "Don't tell him the truth? Don't tell him about us?" Oh, the words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I stared at them both, letting shock and hurt play across my face. "About us what?" I asked quietly. Derek laughed bitterly. "She didn't tell you? Your loving wife has been screwing me for the past 6 months. In your bed, in your house, while you were out working to pay for her lifestyle." Beth started crying. "Derek, stop, please, stop." Derek's voice was getting louder. "You sent me that email, Beth. You said you were going to tell him anyway, so let's just get it all out in the open." I looked at my wife, tears streaming down her face, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. "Is it true, Beth? Are you having an affair with Derek?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "Jake, I can explain." "It's true," Derek interrupted. "And she's been planning to leave you for me. We've been laughing about how clueless you are, how easy it was to fool you." That last part wasn't entirely accurate, but it served my purposes perfectly. I let my face crumple with pain and betrayal. "Get out," I said quietly. "Jake," Beth started. "Both of you," I said, my voice getting stronger. "Get out of my house, now." Derek grabbed Beth's arm. "Come on, we're done here anyway." But Beth pulled away from him. "No, this is my home. Derek, you need to leave." "Your home?" Derek laughed harshly. "You just told me you couldn't wait to get away from this place. You called it a prison." "I never said that," Beth protested. "You said a lot of things, Beth, in person and in writing." I could see the confusion in Beth's eyes. She had no idea what Derek was talking about, but she couldn't say that without revealing more about their affair. "I think you should both leave," I said. "I need time to think." Derek stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Beth stood in our living room crying, probably trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. "Jake, please," she said. "Let me explain." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd shared my life for 20 years and betrayed me without a second thought. "There's nothing to explain," I said. "You made your choice." I walked upstairs and locked myself in our bedroom, leaving Beth alone with the wreckage of her affair. Through the window, I could see Derek sitting in his car, probably trying to call her. But Beth's phone was on the kitchen counter, and she was too afraid to go get it. Phase 2 was complete. Derek and Beth were turning on each other, just as I'd planned. But I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close. The divorce papers were filed within a week, but that was just the legal formality. My real revenge was far more creative and infinitely more satisfying. It started with Derek's job. He worked as a sales manager for a high-end car dealership, the kind of place that prided itself on reputation and family values. I happened to know the owner, a straight-laced guy named Robert Chen, who'd hired me to rewire his showroom the year before. I stopped by the dealership on a Saturday morning when I knew Derek would be working. Robert was there too, going over inventory with his service manager. "Jake," Robert greeted me warmly. "How's business?" "Can't complain," I said. "Actually, I wanted to thank you for recommending Derek to handle my wife's car purchase. Really went above and beyond the call of duty." Robert looked confused. "Derek handled your wife's purchase? When was this?" Oh, several times over the past few months, I said innocently. Very personal service, if you know what I mean. Really made her feel special. I could see Derek across the showroom, and his face had gone pale. He started walking toward us, probably trying to do damage control, but I wasn't finished. In fact, I continued, Derek's been so attentive to Beth that they've developed quite a close relationship. Very close. Family close, you might say. Robert's expression darkened as he processed the implications. Derek arrived just in time to hear me add, Of course, now that we're getting divorced, I suppose Beth won't be needing Derek's special services anymore. Mr. Chen, Derek started, but Robert held up a hand. My office, Robert said curtly. Now. Derek was fired within the hour. Word spread quickly through the dealership, and by Monday morning everyone in town knew that Derek Morrison had been caught sleeping with a customer's wife. But I wasn't done with Derek yet. His apartment lease was up for renewal, and his landlord happened to be a guy I'd done electrical work for several times. A few casual comments about Derek's character and reliability were enough to ensure that his lease wouldn't be renewed. His credit cards were maxed out, his job prospects were non-existent, and his reputation was destroyed. Within 2 weeks, Derek was living in a cheap motel and applying for jobs at fast food restaurants. Beth fared even worse. She'd been working part-time as a real estate agent, mostly selling houses to friends and neighbors who trusted her. But trust was a fragile thing, and adultery had a way of destroying it completely. I made sure everyone knew about the affair, not through gossip or rumors, but through careful, strategic conversations with the right people. Beth's clients started canceling their listings. Her broker received several complaints about her unprofessional behavior. Her real estate license came up for review, and suddenly there were questions about her ethics and judgment. Within a month, Beth was unemployed and unemployable in our small town. But the real masterstroke came when I discovered that Derek had been borrowing money from Beth to fund his lifestyle. Money that came from our joint accounts. Money that I'd earned with my own hands while they were laughing about what a fool I was. I documented every transaction, every loan, every dollar that Derek had stolen from our marriage. Then I filed a lawsuit against him for theft and fraud. Derek couldn't afford a lawyer. His public defender was overworked and uninterested. When the case went to court, I had documentation, witnesses, and a sympathetic judge who didn't look kindly on men who seduced their brothers-in-law's wives. Derek was ordered to pay restitution of $47,000, money he didn't have and couldn't earn. When he defaulted on the judgment, his wages were garnished and his assets seized. The cheap motel kicked him out when he couldn't pay rent. His car was repossessed. His credit was destroyed beyond repair. Last I heard, Derek was living in a homeless shelter 3 towns over, washing dishes for minimum wage and sending every penny to pay off his debt to me. Beth tried to reconcile several times during the divorce proceedings. She wrote letters, sent flowers, even showed up at my workplace begging for another chance. But I was done with her lies and manipulation and casual cruelty. The divorce was finalized on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Beth got half of our assets, as required by law, but half of nothing was still nothing. I'd been very careful about how I structured our finances in the months leading up to the divorce. Our house was sold to pay legal fees. Our savings account was depleted by Derek's theft and the cost of private investigators. Our retirement fund was borrowed against to cover the expenses of starting over. Beth walked away from our 20-year marriage with a 10-year-old car and about $3,000 in cash. She moved in with her sister in another state, probably still trying to figure out how her perfect affair had turned into such a complete disaster. As for me, I started over in a new town, with a new electrical business and a clean slate. I kept Derek's restitution payments as a reminder of what happened to people who tried to make a fool out of me. The money came every month like clockwork, garnished from whatever menial job Derek was working at the time. It wasn't much, maybe $200 or $300, but it was enough to buy groceries or pay utilities. I used Derek's money to take myself out to dinner every month, always at the nicest restaurant I could find. I'd order the most expensive item on the menu, tip generously, and raise a toast to the 2 people who'd taught me that revenge was a dish best served systematically. 6 months after the divorce was final, I received a letter from Beth. She'd found my new address somehow and wanted to apologize, to explain, to ask for forgiveness. I read the letter once, then fed it through my office shredder. Some betrayals were unforgivable, some wounds never healed, and some people deserved exactly what they got. Derek and Beth had wanted to destroy my life, to replace me with someone they thought was better. Instead, They'd destroyed themselves and given me the motivation to build something stronger. I was 40 years old, debt-free, and completely free of the people who'd tried to make me a victim. My business was thriving, my reputation was solid, and every month I got a reminder that justice sometimes did prevail. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I'd earned, and it was enough.